Welcome to another Behind the Music, our Transfigured Nights kind of podcast series where we get to talk with the artists performing on our series. Our next concert is actually my own, happening this Sunday, March 1st at 7 p.m. in the Sanctuary and the magnificent Richard Fowkes Organ. Now, while I thought about figuring out how to interview myself, it felt a little contrived. So I thought a better conversation would be had with our own director of music, Joel Martinson. Joel, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's great to interview you, and I so look forward to this recital.
Thanks. Now, you got to hear a good chunk of the program yesterday. We were getting to polish registrations and making sure balance and everything was working, for which I'm very grateful for your help. What did you hear that our listeners should know about in advance?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, you've been our artist in residence for the last 2 seasons, program years. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity for all of those who have heard you in church to be able to hear you in recital. And this is your first chance to really show what you can do in an hour-ish program on the instrument. As always, our wonderful organist, organ recitalists show and demonstrate all the colors of the organ. And yesterday, when we were going through registrations and I was listening to you, you did that very aptly. The trick, of course, with the Transfiguration organ is it has so much wonderful color and all that, that when we finished, you said, well, I hope I showed enough. And it's like, you just can't in 60 minutes, really demonstrate everything that's possible. And particularly, like we said, in one type, one genre of music, in this case, German, even for over 3 centuries. So my first question for you is, how did you come to this sonata recital? And so what was your impetus at the beginning? And who are the 5 different composers? And what do they allow you to do regarding demonstrating the organ?
Yeah, and isn't it a gift that we have an instrument that you can't hear all of the colors and possibilities in just a 60-minute program? I think that's really remarkable, because I think there are certainly instruments you can go to and listen to for an hour and you're like, okay, we 20 minutes in, check. Like I heard what I needed to. And I love that this instrument showcases all of that. So yeah, the program is called German Organ Sonatas. The 5 composers are Felix Mendelssohn, his 3rd sonata, Johann Sebastian Bach, a trio sonata, so a different kind of texture, C.P.E. Bach sonata, the Hindemith 3rd sonata, and then closing with the Ritter 3rd sonata. And the Ritter was really my inspiration for the program. This was a piece I actually found out about from Michael Barone when I was an undergrad. He loves these sonatas, and he said in particular you should check out the 3rd. And so I have this one recording that has just been in my ears for years and years. I finally learned it actually at SMU when I was doing an Artist Diploma there, working with Stefan, and performed it as part of the OHS recital in Minnesota on an instrument, a little Hendrix organ, which was really remarkable. But it's a piece that, for it being a German romantic instrument, is really kind of harkens back more to classical Baroque styles and textures. So it does really well on an instrument with the kind of voicing that we have on the Richard Fowkes. That is just, it's really clean and articulate while also having this heft and beefiness to it. And so that kind of started the program. And from there, we had somehow, I think, recently talked about the Mendelssohn 3rd Sonata, which in the middle has the Lenten chorale aus tiefer Not as part of the imagery for it. So all of a sudden we were up to, 2 sonatas. And I don't know, I like themes that can focus themselves a little bit on, I'm a very detail-oriented, structured kind of person. And so I like how you can take something like a sonata and yet all of them are very different. So the Mendelssohn manages in the first movement to have almost four different sections, this kind of opening and closing processional moment, and then a slower chorale that he builds into a secondary fugue subject and weaves all that together. So it's kind of a very through composed arc of it, and then ends with just this really gorgeous second movement. And then there's nothing to follow it. So sometimes we maybe think of a sonata as even Beethoven, where it's like a four movement thing. A lot of these are actually three movements, but then in the case of the Mendelssohn and the Ritter, have more of these through composed moments. So I just like the idea that we have pieces that carry the same designation, but how does that inspire the creativity out of composers?
Interesting. I wonder what pieces are like totally new to you in this recital. What have you performed before of the five, and what's new, or what's going back to something you learned a long time ago?
Yeah, so the Mendelssohn was a piece at Interlaken. So it goes all the way back to high school days. And those pieces are almost carry their own fascinating journey, because there's a lot to unlearn and relearn from what high school technique was and musical interpretation of, and being able to kind of see it as a reflection for myself of my own growth as well has been really, really rewarding. The fourth trio sonata was from sophomore year in undergrad. Also carried a lot of interesting technical choices originally to it. But there's something about the second movement of that fourth trio sonata that I think is some of the most gorgeous music that Bach ever wrote. And it sounds so good on the Richards Fowkes. So I knew... I really tried to avoid a German organ sonata program that I didn't have to play a Bach trio sonata, and it just felt like I wasn't going to be able to get away with it. So 4 is very near and dear to my heart, so I'm excited to get to bring that back. What's new then is the CPE Bach sonata, the A minor sonata, which actually I heard Caitlin Emerson play when we did that competition together, over a decade ago now. And I learned a different CPE Bach sonata was required for the competition. I learned a different one, but I fell in love with that one. And I particularly fell in love with what she did with it. And so I actually asked her to send me okay, what were the ornamentations you added on the repeats to it, which she was gracious to share, which is just a fun connection since she was here in the fall with us. The Hindemith sonata was undergrad junior year. But I didn't understand Hindemith as an undergrad. They were notes on a page to me. And I think that there's a better sense of the musical line and underpinning that I actually find really beautiful now. And so it's nice to have a new chance. All of these pieces in some way are getting a rebirth of them, which feels really significant considering our season is called renewal, right? And so it's a nice chance to kind of integrate for myself music that has existed before, but getting to be brought to life on the Richards Fowkes. And then the Ritter was from 8 years ago or so. But a lot of this is repertoire that I wouldn't program on just any instrument. It's an instrument that you want to sit and listen to the clarity and the purity of single stops, not just having to hear kind of combinations. And yes, the combinations are really lovely too, but the middle movement of the CPE Bach where it's just a single flute and you're like, how can this sound this good? Or in the trio sonatas with kind of these individual stops or very select stop pairings that just make it, along with, I guess, the temperament of the instrument as well, that there's just such a clarity to the intonation of it. And so it's really fun to get to bring this music forward. So being able to kind of relearn it and experience it on an instrument that really brings it to life in ways that I haven't had before.
Well, thank you for all that. I think it's wonderful that you're playing music from your teen years, from high school, all the way through your, when you're a professional and working on your artist diploma and all of that. I think that's just wonderful. One thing that's interesting about Hindemith, those of you who are instrumentalists might know that he wrote a sonata for about every single instrument. He was a violist, but he wrote just like for everybody. But he wrote three sonatas for organ, which are very interesting. And you want to tell us a little about just the sort of geopolitical background of that? And I think it's real interesting the fact we think of Hindemith as a neoclassical, neo-Baroque composer, and yet where he was and what organ he actually wrote these for, I think is really interesting.
Well, your detailed mind as the historian is going to answer this question better, so I'm ultimately going to pass it back to you. But what I do find interesting about this that I would also add shows up in three of the five is the chorale-based treatment. And so this sonata, each movement has a different German chorale to it. We of course had the Mendelssohn that does, and then the Ritter has a chorale theme that shows up at really like pivotal moments in the piece that is also really special. And so I think the sonata as a form also is something, meaning just to play, and kind of largely exists in a maybe a more secular mentality. And so to see the infusion of these strong, probably German Lutherans, somewhere in just the culture around them, being able to bring in the chorale melodies feels really intentional with it too. So you can tell us all about the geopolitical movement of Hindemith now. I'm ready for our lecture. Joel, take it away.
Well, it's probably too much, but Hindemith's musical style did not go well with the regime in Germany in the 30s and the 40s. So he had to leave. His wife was half Jewish, and he left and he went to the United States, and he taught at Yale. And Yale has this huge organ in Woolsey Hall that's very romantic. And just this huge behemoth that is really loved by 19th century and kind of post-romantic organists. So he wrote these three pieces, the three sonatas, while he was there, and for this organ. And he talks about using the crescendo pedal and all these things that, compared to other German composers who were in that style, we're like, don't do that. That's too romantic. And so he wanted to get an expression out of the organ that was going to be like with swell pedal, crescendo pedals, all of that stuff. And so it's interesting. And Jonathan uses the swell pedal very well in swell division in order to get both. There's terrace dynamics, but also there's a crescendo in it. And of course, organists, often we just have to do that by imagining in our heads and trying to communicate and sing through the instrument. So anyway, but Hindemith wrote those in exile during a difficult time, and I think that's a good thing to think about at our time. And the Hindemith is actually the last of the latest piece composer on Jonathan's recital, and so that's interesting too. One other thing I wanted to say is that we are now, this recital basically marks 1 year back into the new church, our renovated church, and as we've said, our enhanced acoustics and all of that. And when Jonathan started as artist in residence, we were in Roper Hall with the piano. And then March 1st and 2nd last year was our inauguration of the new space. So I think it's really wonderful to have your organ recital, which can mark this occasion. And those of you who haven't been to Transfiguration, since we have our quote new acoustic, will really want to come, because it's pretty big change, and something that just came from hardwood pews and some different configurations. I wonder if you can tell us, as an organist, what you hear differently, and how the room has become more of a part of your playing and your performance than perhaps it was at other places or before this time. because you did play for us 2 years ago at Easter before we moved, and during Holy Week. So I wonder if you can say just a little bit about how that's changing your perspective, um, you know, regarding this music and just playing at Transfiguration.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because I find the acoustic, and I remember having this conversation as well with in talking about with Willa about the wind quintet. There's just the chance to kind of be able to breathe in it because there's I find Transfiguration, just even in the culture through service, does really well appreciating silence and allowing sort of silence to kind of live in the space. Oftentimes we think about like, okay, how do we quickly move from one thing to the next? And this arc of pacing is like further supported by the fact that the room gets to breathe with the music. And so some of the pacing and the timing of things, the clarity of touch, that you kind of get to listen for what's the backdrop, what's the feedback that I'm really getting. And when you kind of don't have that cushion around it, it feels a lot more like the impetus has to come from the organist out. And this kind of has a support behind it that I think creates a really special experience. And certainly if we think of a lot of the European churches where a lot of this music would have been conceived anyway, it is built into it being able to have that. And so I think the bloom and the effect that we now have in our space really does justice to all of the music that we present at Transfiguration, and certainly does a really excellent job with this recital. And I want to be able to also just say that it's been such a treat for me these last 2 years to be able to be at Transfiguration. And it is exciting. I'd forgotten it's an exact 1 year mark since we got back into the space, which is really special. But there was something really meaningful about getting to start in Roper Hall, because developing that connection with the congregation especially has been really meaningful because we were all, we were down and in the same space. That kind of continues now, even being able to be back in the sanctuary. And so I'm really excited for the opportunity to get to share solo music in this way, in this space, and with the people and family that I've come to know. And getting to make music with you, Joel, is my highlight. So I really am grateful to be here.
Well, thank you so much. We look forward to your recital this Sunday, March 1st, 7 p.m., obviously free and open to the public. We hope you invite your friends and neighbors. And we will have a reception following in the parlor, so you're all invited to that. And it will have a nice German theme fitting with the music of the recital. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and we look forward to this Sunday's recital.